Depending on how familiar you are with different Spanish dialects, you may have noticed that some native Spanish speakers sometimes don't pronounce the S sound. In Spanish studies, we refer to this as S reduction. Today's topic comes at the request of our subscriber Megan, who asked for it in the recent community survey, as well as several other subscribers who've brought it up over the past year. This video is going to be all about S reduction, what it is, who does it, and when they do it, and interesting consequences of S reduction for native speakers and for students of Spanish. Let's begin by describing exactly what we mean by S reduction. A simplified but reasonably adequate explanation goes like this. In some Spanish dialects, certain consonants are pronounced more weakly when they appear in syllable-final position. S is one of those consonants. When S is weakened a little, it comes out sounding something like the English H sound. This is called S aspiration. When it's weakened a lot, it may be omitted completely. This is called S omission. Now, this explanation isn't 100% complete, but it's a really good starting place. Take a minute to read and think about it. S omission may be thought of as an exaggerated expression of S aspiration. So, for example, a native speaker may pronounce a particular S normally when speaking slowly and enunciating carefully, aspirate that same S when speaking casually, and omit that S when speaking quickly. Except when contrasting S aspiration and S omission, in this video I'll lump aspiration and omission together under the term S reduction. Okay, so what does it mean when we say that an S appears in syllable-final position? Someday I'll make a video on Spanish syllabification and I'll go into this in more detail. But for now it's sufficient to say that an S is syllable-initial when it appears before a vowel, and syllable-final when it appears before another consonant or at the end of an utterance. And this rule even applies across word boundaries. So all of the S's in the following list are syllable-initial because they come before a vowel. None of these S's would be reduced in S-reducing dialects. All of the S's in the following list are syllable-final because they come before a consonant or at the end of the utterance. These S's are subject to reduction in S-reducing dialects. Before I demonstrate the pronunciation of reduced S, let me just remind you that in native speech, S reduction is more pronounced when people are speaking casually and at a normal speed. This makes demonstrating S reduction in lesson format a little awkward, because here we're speaking slowly and carefully, and it's precisely in this situation that natives wouldn't reduce S as much, or maybe at all. So while the following examples are accurate representations of S reduction, please understand that the context in which S is reduced is normal speech, not a carefully enunciated lesson. Alright, with that disclaimer, let's listen to the pronunciation of some examples with S reduction. Observe that the syllable-initial S's are all pronounced normally. It's only the syllable-final S's, including S's at the end of utterances, that are reduced. The following are all Spanish proverbs and sayings. Extra points for figuring out what they mean. Nunca es tarde para bien hacer. Antes que te case, mira lo que hace. Más vale tarde que nunca. No hay rosa sin espina. El infierno está lleno de buenas intenciones. La palabra es plata y el silencio es oro. En el país de los ciegos, el tuerto es rey. Poderoso caballero es don dinero. Primero son mis dientes que mis parientes. Aunque la mona se vista de seda, mona se queda. Entre sastres no se pagan hechura. La caridad bien entendida empieza por uno mismo. Sobre gusto no hay nada escrito. So as we've already mentioned, for any given S-reducing native Spanish speaker, there's a spectrum of S reduction. There's also a spectrum of S-reducing dialects. On one end, there are dialects that don't reduce S at all, pretty much ever. One small step along the spectrum, there are dialects that only reduce S in certain limited contexts. For example, I've observed native speakers from Colombia who only reduce S before the trilled R. And one of our subscribers to this channel observed the same phenomenon in a dialect in Spain. This is very understandable, since trilling the R immediately after an S is a difficult phonetic trick, and one way to resolve the difficulty is to aspirate or omit the S. Further along the spectrum, there are dialects that reduce most syllable-final S's during normal casual speech. On the extreme end of the spectrum, there are dialects, or sociolects within dialects, that not only reduce most or all syllable-final S's, but sometimes even reduce S at the end of a word when the next word starts with a vowel. Technically, these are syllable-initial S, since they come before a vowel, and according to the overall pattern of Spanish consonant reduction, they shouldn't be reduced. But some S-reducing dialects sometimes reduce them anyway. Here are some examples of word-final, syllable-initial S reduction. Son las 11. Comes helado. Más hombre. One theme I hope you're picking up on is that there's a lot of variation in S reduction. From the standpoint of phonetics, there's variation in the degree of reduction the S may undergo. On an individual level, there's variation in the situational context in which a person may reduce S or not. And from the perspective of dialectology, there's a spectrum of phonetic contexts in which the S is reduced. All of this makes it impossible to create a hard and fast rule stating exactly which S's are reduced, how much, when, and by whom. Still, as a basis for understanding the concept, the simplified explanation we gave at the beginning is a reasonable starting place. Let's recap that generalization. In some dialects, certain consonants are pronounced more weakly when they appear in syllable-final position. S is one of those consonants. When S is weakened a little, it comes out pronounced something like the English H sound. When it's weakened a lot, it may be omitted completely. To this we can add, some dialects also sometimes reduce word-final syllable-initial S. Okay, so at this point I need to make a disclaimer. I'm pretty sure I've observed natives reducing S's in other phonetic contexts, and I think I've read linguistic studies in which reduction of other S's was described. However, I'm unaware of any rule or regular pattern explaining when those other S's are reduced, so I'm reluctant to try to get into other cases of S reduction. Fortunately, what I've said about it thus far in this video describes the large majority of cases of S reduction and should be more than enough of an explanation for students. If you're a native speaker and feel that I've overlooked something, please contribute to the discussion in the comments. Alright, so which dialects are S-reducing and which ones aren't? The following maps give a reasonable picture of the division between S-reducing and non-S-reducing dialects. Broadly speaking, in Spain, southern dialects tend to be S-reducing, while northern dialects tend not to be. In South America, coastal, lowland, and southern cone dialects tend to be S-reducing, while Andean and Amazonian dialects generally aren't. Caribbean and Central American dialects tend to be S-reducing, while Mexican dialects tend not to be S-reducing, with some exceptions. Of course, keeping in mind all the ways in which this phenomenon varies, maps such as these are just helpful generalizations, not intended to be perfectly accurate. One interesting phenomenon that occurs pretty much exclusively in S-reducing dialects is S-hypercorrection. This is when natives are speaking in a more formal setting and they feel they ought to pronounce all of their S's. What sometimes happens is that they insert S's into words where they don't belong. They may even reduce some S's and insert unnecessary S's in the same word or phrase. Let's look at some examples. First, I'll pronounce these sentences with standard pronunciation, then with S reduction, then with hypercorrection. Some of these examples I'll also pronounce with S reduction in some places and hypercorrection in others. Estamos en una etapa de desarrollo. 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 Era un objeto antiguo. Era un objeto antiguo. Tenemos que determinarlo. Tenemos que determinarlo. Tenemos que determinarlo. Tenemos que determinarlo. El niño es muy creativo. 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 Me gusta la literatura. Me gusta la literatura. Me gusta la literatura. Me gusta la literatura. Tienes que transmitir el mensaje. 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 All of this S reduction and hypercorrection creates challenges and questions for students of Spanish. The initial challenge is simply understanding native speech. When you hear someone speaking in your native language, you generally aren't even aware of individual sounds the speaker is making. You don't focus on individual words or even sentences. Instead, the meaning of whole ideas just seems to enter your brain as you listen. But when you're starting out learning a foreign language, it's different. Understanding someone is an exercise in which you assemble sounds into words and words into sentences based on rules you've drummed into your head. And something as small as a missing S or the insertion of an unnecessary S may trip you up and make a word unintelligible. So if you're a Spanish student and you anticipate visiting a place where natives reduce S's, what do? Well, the only thing you can do, embrace it. Understand that S reduction's not a pronunciation defect, and it isn't something done primarily by uneducated people. Somewhere around half of the Spanish-speaking world does it to one degree or another. People of every socioeconomic class, including doctors, lawyers, and professors. So study it, think about it, prepare for it. If you put a little bit of thought into it, you'll get used to it soon enough, just like any other aspect of the language. One final issue I'd like to address is this. Should you, as a non-native speaker of Spanish, try to learn to reduce your S's? For most students, I'd say no. Generally speaking, I recommend that students of Spanish try to speak with as close to neutral pronunciation as possible for a few reasons. The first is that as a non-native speaker, you're likely to do it wrong. Most non-native speakers of Spanish don't have an intuitive feel for which S's are syllable-final and which are syllable-initial. The result is that when speaking at a normal speed, they're likely to get confused and reduce the wrong S's and fail to reduce the right ones. They think they're making themselves sound more authentic by trying to imitate local pronunciation, but without realizing it, they're actually doing the opposite. The second reason is that as hard as it is to admit, you have imperfections in your Spanish pronunciation. All of us who are non-native speakers do. Adding non-standard or regionally specific features to your already imperfect pronunciation will not make you sound better or more authentic to most native listeners. Do people from the Boston area think that a foreigner who tries to imitate a stereotypical Boston accent sounds better than a foreigner who tries to speak standard American English? Probably not, and this analogy is generally applicable. Most native listeners will find your foreign accent more normal sounding and less distracting when paired with neutral or standard pronunciation. And a third reason is that over your lifetime, you'll probably have contact with Spanish speakers from many different regions. Adopting the most neutral pronunciation you can will make your Spanish compatible with the widest variety of native dialects and the largest population of native speakers. All that being said, I've lived both on the coast of Ecuador and in the Dominican Republic, two places where S reduction is ubiquitous. I've had many close friends from those places, as well as from Chile, Argentina, El Salvador, southern Spain, and other places where S aspiration is the rule. I love the sound of these and other S-aspirating dialects, so my recommendation that students use neutral pronunciation is based on practical consideration and is not in any way reflective of how much I appreciate and enjoy listening to S-reducing dialects. Alright, this has been our discussion of S reduction in Spanish. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. If you have any questions about the Spanish language, please ask in the comments. I'd be happy to consider making a video to answer your question.